Welcome, my dear students. This is going to be your second lecture under week 8. We started in the last class mostly on electronic waste, right? And in that particular segment, we have seen that this has become an increasing, concern, particularly whenever we look at the different categories of waste. This electronic waste is coming up heavily, particularly in the recent times. And this has definitely, as a resultant impact of that expansion of infrastructure related to these electronics or electrical accessories, instruments, to make the system more, refined, to make system more user friendly, and as a result of which definitely and as well as more use efficient, means the efficiency of that particular system we wanted to always enhance. And once we wanted to do that, definitely we have to take help of either electrical gadgets or electronic items. In the last class also we have seen that what is the total amount which is being generated from different sources, that what are the possible sources of these particular electronic wastes are. And then at the same time we wanted to also make some sort of an estimate in a format of making the estimation related to that what are the probable composition of that particular electronic waste that we have also seen. So now today onwards we are likely to look at that what is the impact of this electronic waste on your ecosystem. And whenever I am saying ecosystem, definitely I am trying to emphasize on the ecosystem services, that if it is going to make any sort of impairment, or whether in what format, or what are those definitive areas your health is going to be impacted. So mostly we will be looking at environment as well as health, impact of this electronic waste on your environment and health. So this was those particular segments which we are going to discuss: impacts of e-waste on environment and impact of e-waste on human health. So once we talk about this particular electronic waste, as I mentioned, definitely there is many ways of handling this particular waste, and if we keep on concentrating mostly on your informal sector of your waste management, definitely there will be multiple ways which can aggravate this problem or aggravate these issues, particularly on your environment as well as your health system, right. So as I said that these particular items, we already discussed about those electrical or electronic items which are when we talk about their composition. We mentioned that yes, apart from your valuable items, they also contain some of your toxic elements, right, toxic substances. And in many cases users are unlikely to have contact with these substances while the items are functional. But when they become an waste, so definitely this toxicant can be released into your ecosystem or your environment. And if it is not being properly managed, and then only these things can happen. And in turn, once we are putting this particular material or discarded electronic material or electrical material into your ecosystem, definitely they can give rise number of chemicals, maybe to the tune of 1000 varied group of chemicals can be released into your environment. And if it is going to be there, so as I said that definitely these are going to make the systems more complicated. So these are those definitive components through which this electronic waste, if it is not, as I said, if it is not properly managed, or if it is not, if you have some sort of environmentally unsound practices which are available or which are practiced by that particular group of community, definitely these things can make their entry either through this scavenging or dumping on land or water bodies, right, or landfilling along with the other regular waste, because once you are addressing the issues of the solid waste, because this is becoming one component of it among diverse group of things can be there, right, starting from your households, starting from your biomedical, starting from your municipal waste. So, there will be multiple, and then opening, burning or heating, incineration sort of techniques many they employ, but those are not very organized group of activity, right. Those are not basically some sort of structured planning for managing that particular waste. And then acid baths or acid leaching, stripping and shredding these plastic coatings based on the nature of those particular plastics. Definitely there will be consequences will be there, and manual disassembly of your equipment. So, many a time it happens because of once things upgraded, definitely many a time we assemble that particular part which is disassembled remains as such and it becomes an waste. So, these activities are considered hazardous to the environment and health as they release, as I mentioned, that they release toxic pollutants, and which is basically going to contaminate your air, soil, dust and water at recycling sites and in neighboring communities. So, these are the ways through which this electronic waste is going to be exposed into your system. And once we talk about this particular electronic waste is getting exposed, definitely I mentioned that it is going to impact initially your environment, and then at the broader end definitely it is going to impact your health, human health as well as ecosystem health in broader dimension. So, this e-waste system basically is considered hazardous. We already mentioned that there are serious risks of your human and environmental health, particularly from this e-waste, because of the presence of high qualities and high, basically there are, as I said, there are many useful materials are there within this particular component. So, there will be those high quality materials will be there, as well as it is going to be a high quantity of some of your heavy metals will be there as well, means whether it is mercury, lead and cadmium, toxic chemicals, polychlorinated biphenyls, halogens and bromine. So, these are those particular constituents once we mentioned related to their composition. These are going to be always if it is not properly or if it is not if it is not handled rationally, definitely there are chances of entry of this material into your system. And we also emphasize on that particular fact that sometimes this becomes a compulsion, because once you have a rapid advancement of your technology or your infrastructure has to be changed accordingly. So, if you have a rapid technology advancement which basically replace the older one with a newer one, so definitely what is going to be the fate of those older ones? Definitely it has to be it has to be either it is put it in some places or dumped in some places. So, from there if we continue to keep all of them for a longer period of time, definitely there are chances of all those mishappenings. So, these replace basically your electronic devices with newer models generating electronic waste faster, and that is the reason the growth rate is very fast. We have mentioned in the last class that it is the growth rate is almost to the tune of 3 to 5%. So, with this growth rate definitely we will have a very far reaching consequences if we do not manage it properly, and if we do not plan some very rigid plans or consistent planning is not there. So, it is hazardous to the environment and human health. So, definitely we need to understand that how this is going to affect, this particular sector or this health, or whether it is your ecosystem health or whether it is your human health. So, this is, I was mentioning or emphasizing on that particular part of informal way of doing it, informal way of managing it, and if someone is going to do that, definitely it is going to impact basically these natural resources, whether you talk about air, whether you talk about soil, or whether you talk about water. So, this system or this continuum is going to be impacted, whether you talk about the soil, then followed by water, and then finally whatever plant is growing over that particular place, that is going to be impacted, and finally your animal is going to be impacted. So, these continuum is getting impacted or affected because of those mismanagement or informal way of doing that sort of recycling or whatever, means managing those particular electronic waste. And once I am talking about this informal way of doing it, definitely this is going to include your open burning, heating and acid bathing of old electronics. So, and these may be those consequences, and if it is going to be impacted, I mentioned that from the environment, e-waste toxicants find their way into ultimately to your animal and ultimately to the whole ecosystem. The health of this ecosystem is going to be impacted. So, you can see all those food items is going to be impacted, and definitely finally it is going to your higher animals. So, this informal way of doing it, so this makes a very important caution over that definitely there needs that sort of dedicated service or dedicated sort of approach to go ahead with this. And once we talk about this particular impact on your environment and health, definitely I mentioned about those particular components when I mentioned that how it is going to be impacted on your environment. We mentioned about your water, because ultimately if it is going to enrich those particular groundwater, so this is going to be polluted, whether with reference to some of your heavy metals, metalloids. So, multiple materials can be enriched. There may be acidification of soil, because which is very common, particularly once you are handling with those batteries, definitely this will be very important issue, and acidification is going to make huge impact, particularly on your biodiversity, on your nutrient cycling, everything is going to be impacted. There are chances through these particular mode, your air pollution, means through that particular incineration, definitely you have those chances, right. And then e-waste accounts for 40% of the lead and 75% of the heavy metals found in landfills. So, basically majority of these particular heavy metals, metalloids, so particularly these toxicants, they are mostly being contributed by this electronic waste as a whole, mostly you can see 40% and 75%, the major part. And once we talk about that how it is going to be impacted on human health, definitely we will be talking in details what are those definitive consequences or the manifestations, particularly on human, that we are going to discuss. But basically it is going to, just imagine, it is going to impact your DNA, that is your genetic content, that is it can be damaged, impaired. There are possibilities of lung cancer, damage to heart, liver and spleen, chronic damage to the brain, that means neuro-related diseases are most common, and asthmatic bronchitis. This asthmatic bronchitis is also going to be another impact out of this particular, means once we talk about the impact on your environment and health, this is going to be another very important issue. Now, we will just elaborate particularly with reference to the environmental impact. In general, we have learned that mostly it is being impacted, mostly your natural resources is being impacted. So, now we are likely to see what are those impacts and how that how that is being impacted, right. So, as I mentioned earlier also that this technology advances rapidly and you have an accumulation of this particular electronic waste, and this is going to be a very major issue. And how it is going to impact? Definitely it is going to impact through your all toxic chemicals and your heavy metals. So, these electronic waste often contains your hazardous materials such as your lead, mercury, cadmium and brominated flame retardants. We also already mentioned that during that composition. So, these, if it is not properly managed or improper disposal, can lead to your soil and water contamination and harming your ecosystem. Your biodiversity, soil biodiversity is going to be impacted very badly, and ultimately your human health it can be. The next is your related to your air pollution, informal, any sort of recycling methods, whether you talk about burning, electronic burning of those electronic components to extract valuable metals, release toxic fumes into your air, and definitely if it is going to happen for a longer period of time, definitely the air health is going to be impacted, contributing to air pollution, and respiratory illness are mostly there. We mentioned about those diseases mostly related to bronchitis, related to your lungs, right, related to your those neuro related diseases, we mentioned that. And then water pollution, dumping this particular electronic waste into your water bodies. This will introduce your toxic substances that poison your aquatic life as well as disrupt your food chain. So, this is also going to be there, and if something out of those nanoplastic or microplastic is being introduced, so definitely it can also be transmitted through that particular system and can harm those particular components. And at the same time there are issues related to your resource wastage. That means electronics are made up from those finite resources, and those are basically their rare earth elements or rare earth metals, and failure to, if we are not able to make recycling of them properly, so definitely means these precious materials are getting wasted. So, creating further strain on mining and resource extraction, definitely it is going to have an expenditure on energy again. So, these resources with reference to, and these are all finite resources, and once we started mining these particular resources, after some point of time it is going to be exhausted. So, that is need to be taken care of. Now, we will come to your soil and water contamination. Basically, we mentioned that the leaching of toxic substances, and if it is properly, if it is not properly done, that means if it is improperly disposed, particularly in landfills or in dump sites, hazardous substance like your lead, mercury, cadmium and brominated flame retardants, they can leach and they can contaminate your soil, groundwater. And definitely if it is going to happen, we also talked about those acidification of your soil, and if it is going to happen like this, definitely the soil fertility is going to be reduced. That means the health is also going to be impacted of your soil. So, contaminated soil becomes less fertile. You need more inputs for getting more efficiency, particularly with reference to your crop production. So, impacting your plant growth and crop yields. Water pollution, we already mentioned that yes, these are those particular areas and which can impact your aquatic life and pose risks to human health if used for drinking or irrigation. And when we talk about air pollution, basically this is going to be a resultant impact of this burning and incineration, and burning of this particular incinerating this electronic waste releases toxic fumes and particulate matter into the air, contributing to your air pollution and respiratory problems, right. This is very frequent one which is happening. And then you have chances of introduction of your dust particle as well. So, during your e-waste recycling activities, pollutants can spread into your air and form in the form of dust, and posing risk to both the environment and your biological system. And the next important impact is going to be on your climate. That means you are changing your climatic scenario with reference to your greenhouse gas emission, because these electronic waste decomposition and incineration release your greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide, contributing to your climate change. That means variabilities within your climate. with reference to your temperature, with reference to your precipitation. And we also mentioned that resource depletion is going to be very, very important, particularly related to your rare earth metals. Elements like neodymium, dysprosium and this terbium, these are very essential, particularly for your electronics like your smartphone, batteries and magnets. And these metals are scarce. Their content in your earth crust is always going to be in ppb level, right, or maybe in some cases ppm level. And these metals are scarce, as I said, and require extensive mining efforts also. That means they are always present at the across the soil profile. If you see, it's at a very greater depth. So definitely you need a larger amount of effort with reference to your mining activities, and which is definitely is going to harm your environment. So with reference to this rare earth element, whether you talk about this neodymium, whether you talk about this dysprosium and terbium, because these are mostly important component, and these are mostly essential component, particularly for your those electronics and electronics item mostly, we mentioned that. And then precious metals, gold, silver, platinum and palladium, these are also used in your this particular circuit, in making those circuits. And if we are going to make any sort of improper disposal, that means valuable resources are lost forever, leading to increased mining activities to meet the demand. Then copper, used in wiring of electronics, copper is extracted through this energy intensive mining process. Most of these mining processes, as I said, that these elements, whether you talk about these rare earth elements or these micronutrient sort of thing, so they always present at the lower depth. So definitely you need more sort of activities, or more energy is needed. So these e-waste recycling could save millions of tons of copper annually. And plastic and other materials, many devices contain specialized plastics, particularly nanoplastic, microplastics and alloys, and which are hard to reclaim through informal recycling practices. And definitely it is going to result in terms of, if you look at in terms of wastage, definitely it is going to contribute to that particular waste material. So we have seen that with reference to climate change, it is going to impact. At the same time, we have issues related to your resource depletion as well. And it also impact your wildlife, right? Wildlife, particularly direct harm. Wildlife can become ill or die, particularly once some of those animals they ingest, or if they are being exposed to particularly those toxins released by these electronic waste. So these are those possibilities are there, which is can happen. And there are possibilities of habitat degradation also. I was talking about those microbial biodiversity. So definitely these e-waste contamination can degrade wildlife habitats as well as impacting your ecosystem, and some of those habitats can be impaired at some point of time, and at the same time that your biodiversity is also getting lost. Now we will come to your human health risk, that what are those possibilities. We already mentioned those particular areas, that yes, these are those particular areas where it is going to be impacted, with reference to whether you talk about your related to your nervous system, right, related to your your ingestion, particularly with reference to your gastrointestinal disorder, many things is there within that particular category. So this exposure to this toxic substance from electronic waste can lead to various health problems, particularly related to your respiratory issues, neurological damage and developmental problems. And developmental problems related to these neonatal developmental problems related to the women, we are going to highlight on that particular issue as well. And as I said, that especially the most affected category is always going to be your children and pregnant women. So if you look at the most vulnerable population, either it is going to be your children or those particular handler which are involved in your informal sector of informal processing, and finally your pregnant women, they are immensely impacted through this. So, if it is children, children are particularly vulnerable to the effects of this electronic waste, to their small size, less developed organs and rapid rate of growth and development. These are, those consequences. So, children are mostly affected, and there very recently ILO, the International Labour Organization, and WHO, they make a joint collaborative effort to look at that who is going to be the most impacted category, particularly across the different age groups. So, to their findings, it also came, these children as well as the women, they are the most impacted one. Then informal e-waste worker or electronic waste worker. So, workers in the informal electronic waste recycling sector are at high risk of exposure to hazardous chemicals due to unsafe working condition and lack of protective equipment, because they are handling it very casually, and ultimately it is going to be impacted either either through ingestion or anything can happen particularly. Okay. Then residents near electronic waste facilities, where these particular facilities there, where this particular electronic waste is being processed. So, people living near these electronic waste recycling sites or landfills are exposed to environmental contamination, which can lead to various health problems. So, it is always there, particularly those processing units or sites, adjoining areas are always going to be. And finally, I mentioned that those pregnant women, exposure to this toxic electronic waste can affect their health and development of the unborn child. So, this is going to be very, very important, particularly with reference to this. And these informal e-waste recycling activities, if it is not properly handled, definitely will pose multiple. If we just put them in those different categories with reference to your neurodevelopmental issues, we have seen that what are those particular group of people who are being mostly affected. Now it is the group of those particular diseases, or if I just make it a generalization, that what are those basic diseases are going to be impacted through this particular mismanagement of this electronic waste. Your neurodevelopmental issues, exposure to neurotoxic substances like lead, mercury in electronic waste can disrupt the development of the central nervous system and potentially leading to your all those neurodevelopmental disorders. Your respiratory problems related to lungs, we already mentioned that related to lungs, even to the tune of lungs cancer can be there. Exposure to toxins released during electronic waste handling and recycling can cause your respiratory ailments like breathing difficulties, your coughing, asthma, bronchitis, especially for workers in this particular informal sector. There are increased risk of cancer as well. That means this electronic waste contains carcinogenic substances. We mentioned those heavy metals and metalloids, and some of them are can cause or carcinogenic in nature. So, and their exposure to this chemical can increase the risk of developing certain types of cancer. Reproductive and developmental issues, we talked about those pregnant women, that how that exposure can give rise to some sort of abnormalities on those particular unborn child. Exposure those to toxic chemical in electronic waste can negatively impact reproductive health, potentially leading to adverse neonatal outcomes like stillbirth and premature birth. Damage to other organs as well. This can can impact your kidney, liver, or your immunity system, leading to various health problems. So, these are those particular issues, as well as you have a chance of skin problems. So, exposure to certain chemicals in these electronic waste can cause skin irritation and other dermatological issues, and then cardiovascular problems, right. Exposure to heavy metals like lead can damage your blood and cardiovascular systems as well. This particular impact, which is being impacted particularly on your human, so that we have seen, and if we look at those manifestations, particularly with reference to that, what are those manifestations is being done. So, here we have seen that the manifestation in the form of vomiting, maybe fatigue, maybe we mentioned about those cancer, maybe appetite loss, diarrhea, headache. So, these are those manifestations initially will be seen, and for further diagnosis they can be diagnosed with those very important diseases that I mentioned and deadly diseases I mentioned, even sleeplessness, muscular and abdominal pain. So, these are this is related to that particular issues of gastrointestinal disorder sort of thing. And these impact of this electronic waste is most severe, particularly in developing nation. And if we look at the underdeveloped world, there the situation is more severe. And this happens because of some of the cases you will find that they don't have that sort of recycling process in place, and at the same time those discarded materials, electronic waste, is being dumped on those particular countries. So these are the real problem, particularly if you look at Africa in particular, right. So Africa faces a significant challenge, particularly once trying to address these issues of electronic waste. So they are having a very difficult time to address this issue. So in today's lecture, so what we have learned is basically we wanted to see the impacts of this particular electronic waste on your health, at the same time on your environment. So in environmental component, we have a categorical understanding related to those natural resources, soil, water, air, right. And at the same time, we have also seen that with reference to health component, so those different categories of people who are going to be affected or impacted mostly, particularly because of this electronic waste is being introduced to that particular system. What are those manifestations, particularly with reference to these ailments or these changes that is being taken place, particularly with reference to your electronic waste, which is a very, very important part of this. Once anybody is trying to address this issue of electronic waste, he need to understand these particular different segments, because if we know the composition, if we know the nature of this particular electronic waste, definitely we will be able to make out that yes, if this is the highest number which is coming up as an electronic waste, so this can generate this number of heavy metals, metalloids or other plastics or whatever the other consequences. And definitely once we are able to figure it out, once we are able to make an inventory of this, definitely we will be able to make those particular management more rationally. And this rational management is very, very important, because we have seen that if we wanted to address those issues of your sustainability, definitely these issues are going to be there, because whether you talk about your human health, whether you talk about ecosystem health, and whether you talk about those particular the whole productivity of the system, definitely if it is not being managed properly, so and we need to look at all these consequences. Once we are able to aware of all these consequences, definitely we will be able to make those sort of channelization of our idea towards making those rigid plans or strategies to come up with those sort of electronic waste management. So until then, thank you very much. In the next class, we are going to talk about those particular how you are going to manage these electronic waste. Thank you.